Alright, let's talk about animation and live-action adaptation, shall we? As animators have pushed for their quest for photorealism, it was only really a matter of time before we started seeing characters in animation transition over to live-action. And the process over the years has seen some mixed results, with some being simple transitions from A to B, and others having been much more painful. So, with the third Sonic movie on the horizon and the ever-looming presence of live-action Stitch about, I wanted to take a dive and look at some of the characters that have made the jump over the years. Now, live-action adaptations have come in several forms. You've got just taking characters and having them played by humans, you've got costume performances, and then you've got CG characters. It was always gonna be tricky because you're taking characters that have been created where there are no limitations on imagination or character design and applying that to a world where physics actually exists, and trying to make that believable is sometimes a bit of a ball ache. I'm not saying there was no effort placed into some of these designs, but maybe some have worked out better than others. Let's start with Netflix's favorite thing to do: take a long-running, celebrated anime and turn it into a live-action series with acting equivalents to Nickelodeon in the early noughties. There have been a few of these over the years, and more on the way, I'm sure, but there are three standouts as of now: One Piece, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Death Note. Death Note was a very successful dark anime about a high schooler finding a book that had the power to kill people. It dealt with, very heavy themes, had a great gothic visual style, and asked lots of questions about morality. And in 2017, Netflix decided to give it the live-action treatment, and what they released just felt stale. It brushed over the central concept and the moral questions of having the power to kill without any consequences coming back to you, and had ham-fisted acting that not even the voice talents of Willem Dafoe could have saved. That being said, transitioning the character of Ryuk into live action was done pretty brilliantly. The original character was intended to be unnerving to look at, and the limited budget of the Death Note movie being only around $40 million meant that they had to be selective with how they actually used him. So they shot him in mostly dark locations, never giving us a real look at his face, and it was surprisingly effective, I have to say. There are plenty of other problems with this film, but that decision certainly wasn't one of them. But let's move up a little bit. Now we can turn to the bigger budget adventures of Netflix, such as one that's actually had genuine commercial success with the One Piece adaptation. A swashbuckling pirate adventure if there ever was one. The original anime has been going on for literal decades at this point, with over 1,000 episodes to its name. The live-action series adapts the East Blue saga, retroactively condensing it into an 8-episode season that additionally sets up some of the later things to come. But now let's have a look at how the characters themselves transition. Luffy maintains his boyish charm very well, his reluctant crew have the right level of standoffishness in the early days, and on the whole, you can tell there's good money spent on proper sets and astounding locations. The casting is brilliantly accurate for the character traits of their roles, and there's just a little bit of CGI involved whenever Luffy's arms need to turn into rubber. One of the standout transitions from me was definitely Buggy the Clown Pirate. What was already an unhinged character in the actual anime has been made much more imposing. His look in the anime is decidedly cleaner, possibly a factor of the time, but in the live-action version, he feels a lot dirtier with the smudged makeup and the terrifically hammy performance. And then as the fun bag between the middle of this spectrum of Netflix adaptations, finally we move over to the other big-ish hitter and most controversial of the cool, Avatar: The Last Airbender. The original anime, if you even want to call it an anime, was a fun and whimsical delight. It had just the right amount of world building to be accessible to younger viewers, but a complex world to keep long-term fans satiated, and only grew with more political moralities as it went along. A live-action version had also infamously been attempted by M. Night Shyamalan, and that's been talked about to death, so I'll instead focus on Netflix once again throwing money at the wall and hoping something sticks. It's the more relevant adaptation anyway. And you have to admire the team at Netflix for at least staying racially appropriate to the source material this time around, but even still, watching it, I don't know, it feels a little joyless, like the fun has been sapped out of it. It's fine as an adaptation, but Avatar itself should have been so much, more, very much the middle child between Death Note and One Piece. As of these three, I think it's pretty clear to say the most successful is definitely One Piece, not just as commercial success, but genuine adaptation quality. And as someone who didn't love anime and came to it with relatively fresh eyes, it did a good job and condensing for what some people was a completely inaccessible mess of a show into something more palatable. If you want to talk straight visual adaptation, then I think Avatar wins for being a one-to-one translation, but I think One Piece is collectively a greater show than the other two, with Death Note coming in second for the creativity, and Avatar being last for, blandness, I guess. There's a multifaceted layering when it comes to how to do an adaptation and how to do it right, and clearly each of these have pros and cons on different layers. characters. But moving on from streaming, we then have, of course, Hollywood themselves, and there's a few things up for grabs in this transitional category. Firstly, I'm discounting the likes of Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Looney Tunes Back in Action. Whilst technically complex and great nostalgic movies, I want to focus on the more photorealistic adaptations. And we can divide these into 3 different categories: live-action humans, real costumes, and fully computer-generated characters. Each of these have a wealth of movies we could talk about within them. There's Dragon Ball Evolution, Inspector Gadget, and many other attempts at real humans. Costumes, you've got the likes of turtles, Grinches, and cats in hats. There's so many to talk about, so let's just pick a few. Inspector Gadget. Now, who remembers this one, huh? The live-action Inspector Gadget movie released in 1999 featuring Matthew Broderick in the lead role. The film was largely criticized at the time, but there are those in the generation between Millennial and Gen Z, Zillennial, remember the film quite favorably. I was one of those until I rewatched it. Back in the day, I remember renting it and its direct DVD sequel from Blockbuster on several occasions. The film itself has a mask-esque tone, playing largely on slapstick humor to get big laughs, and whilst stylistically it shares a lot with the original cartoon, there's a lot of deviations from the source material. I mean, first of all, this isn't even an Inspector Gadget movie, this is a toned-down RoboCop movie. I mean, it's pretty much exactly the same. Hard-working police person gets mortally wounded and has experimental technology grafted onto him to save him. That's just RoboCop. The main villain, Dr. Claw, actually shows his face, which was never done in the original cartoon, and how can we forget the plastic Broderick? The teeth alone are enough to blind you. And he's seemingly controlled by a sentient spider. Is this the inspiration for Penny Parker in the Spider-Verse movies? Despite the negative reception, the film then got a sequel direct to DVD in 2003, and while praised for coming closer to the source material, it faded into obscurity pretty quickly. Wasn't even Broderick anyway. Talking of things that should fade into obscurity, that brings us nicely to Dragon Ball Evolution, or as I like to call it, Hair Gel, the movie. It's like Hairspray, but much, much worse for you. Now, I'm not much of a Dragon Ball guy, but I certainly do remember the absolute insanity that accompanied this movie. People hate this movie, and I mean truly hate, and honestly, you can see why. I see watching it, and the acting is awful, the plot nonsensical, and I mean, what are these character designs? The guy playing Goku is just, he's not right. His hair looks like it could stick him to a ceiling, and they've tried to set it in modern day America. It's just wrong. Inspector Gadget and Hair Gel go right to the bottom of the pile if we're ranking all of these suddenly. But then, let's have a look at the nightmare-fueled world that was, for a time, costumed live-action adaptations. Now, costume characters have been scaring children since movies were really invented, but there are a few standouts that stray right into nightmare-fueled territory. Starting off, we've got the live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies from the 90s, holding a high rank for expressive full-body costuming. In motion, they work almost perfectly thanks to state-of-the-art animatronics from the Henson Company that allowed for facial expressions in the masks. However, leave them still for too long and we might start to veer into Five Nights at Freddy's territory. I mean, this was the DVD cover I had as a kid. Those dead eyes and slightly open mouth will be with me forever, I think. The Turtles got another live-action revisit with Michael Bay, of all people, giving the franchise a crack in 2014. This time, they opted for a full CG look this time around, and, well, they certainly look more like turtles. There is something uncanny valley about these versions too, isn't there? I think maybe it's the eyes are too small behind the masks, and without masks, they are, whoa, something. I will say, I think the second movie got the brotherly dynamic down pat a little bit more, but I love those original 90s movies. Even the weird time travel one. I know it's not good, but it's something. And I think it is largely to do with the expressions that Jim Henson and co were able to pull out of the character design. It was the right level of cartoony, again in motion, while still getting the point across and still feeling real. Thank you for making it halfway through this video. Come subscribe if you haven't already. I'll let you get back to the rest of the video now. Jim Henson's company have been back at it again recently as well, so I think it's a good time to address the bear-shaped elephant in the room, Five Nights at Freddy's. Is there an elephant animatronic? There must be at this point. Either way, you cannot argue that the creature work in the movie is not top class. If we were doing this based on how accurate the live-action interpretation looked compared to the source material, FNAF would win hands down. It really is amazing the work that Henson's company have done to bring these weird-looking animatronics to life. They can emote, they can move around, and at times, they can actually be scary, and they are a one-to-one adaptation there. It's really interesting going from the turtles' faces to these whole body costumes. It's the same company 30 years later, and one of them's intently trying to be creepy looking, sure. Still, they are killing it. Hats off to the Henson Company. Adding these to my rankings that I guess we're doing now, I'm gonna put the Turtles quite high up the list, giving the edge to the 90s costumes, but if we're talking straight design, Fazbear has to win it for me. Speaking of hats off, let's pivot back to the early 2000s with The Cat in the Hat. And to sum up my feelings on that one real quick, it's outstanding production quality, horrible central costume. The whiskers are the worst offenders for me. I mean, when you rewatch it and pay attention to how much they're bouncing, you just can't stop staring at them. And yet, this is unapologetically the most 2000s movie I have ever seen. The overly garish color palette, the questionable jokes, and the appearance of Alec Baldwin just screams early millennium in all the best and worst possible ways. Sticking with a 2000s Dr. Seuss theme, we can then turn to a holiday offering in Jim Carrey's The Grinch movie. The Grinch, in my house anyway, is a Christmas staple. Every year it gets screened at least once, and the nostalgia is most definitely strong with this one. Once again, the production design calling back to Seuss's original illustrations is on point, with wavy buildings, surprisingly dark lighting design, and an absolute masterclass in prosthetics. I mean, seriously, everyone in this movie is wearing some kind of prosthetic nose or exuberant hairpiece. And how can we not mention Jim Carrey's performance? It is the thing about this movie that everyone remembers. The fact that this costume works so well and gives him the ability to shine through the 7 hours worth of makeup is absolutely fantastic. It's to the point the guy had to go through torture training to wear all this stuff. I feel like it might have been 11 hours, not 7 as well. He's so cartoonish in his delivery, as Carrey is of course known to do, but I really don't think it's ever really worked more than it has here. Realistically, there's not a lot separating the Grinch and the cat. In fact, they actually share the same designer, so I don't know why one is so much more unsettling than the other. Maybe to do with the lack of reference for what a Grinch should look like, I don't know, or it might even just be me. But even still, I'm just gonna drop the Cat in the Hat towards the middle of the row here. At least the guy got the titular hat right, and let's put the Grinch just below the turtles. There are other costume appearances through the years. The Mad Hatter, as portrayed by Johnny Depp, Maleficent from, well, Maleficent and all of the Disney princess remakes that have been gracing our screens in recent years. Yeah, gracing's the right word there. But if I wanted to do absolutely all of them, this video would be like 2 hours long, if not more. I don't think anyone wants to go quite that far. So let's move on to the creme de la creme, CG live action. It's debatable whether or not you could even count these as live action. You know, I'm looking at you, Lion King 2019 and Mufasa, the Age of Mufasa or whatever. But they are designed to be real. They're supposed to interact with live action counterparts, and so I'm counting them as such. 2019 graced us with Detective Pikachu, a movie that I'm still not convinced even exists despite having seen it. Ryan Reynolds voices of Pikachu in a live action Pokemon movie. 12-year-old me is screaming from the rooftops while clutching his Pokemon card, which I have consequently lost, and my bank account hates me for that. The movie seemed to start an obsession with fur, and it seems to be the thing that modern day live action just loves to do, making everything a little bit hairy. I mean, was I the only one that thought Pikachu had like a rubbery body like a penguin? He's an electric mouse, so I suppose it makes sense that he's a little furry, but still, it didn't look right for me the first watch. Anyway, since this movie, it seems that everything's turned furry. Sonic and Stitch, both blue, both small, both furry. Does everything need to be that furry to look real? Is there no such thing as short-haired fur these days? Anyway, the movie brought a select few Pokemon to life with, on the whole, very good results. Bulbasaur was cute and charming, Charizard was actually quite intimidating, as it really should be, and Mr. Mime was interesting. And after watching the movie, I did come around on the furry looks of Pikachu, even if Deadpool's voice coming out of it still didn't quite jive completely. And then, of course, I mentioned Sonic earlier. Let's get to him. Who would have thought that a trailer would change the entire fate of a franchise? Just look at those teeth. They're looking at you. Might as well look back. Somewhere out there is a cut of the first Sonic movie with at least some finished shots of this version of the character design. Luckily for the fans, and indeed themselves, Paramount listened to criticism and redid the entire design, opting for a more faithful look to the original game. Great. And here we are now. We've had Tails, Knuckles, and now Shadow Wick is hitting cinemas in December. I highly doubt that we would have gotten an entire trilogy of these things if they had stuck with that original design. Can you imagine the plushies they would have had sitting on shelves in children's bedrooms waiting for you to fall asleep? God. And now we can look ahead a bit. What's in the future for animation to live action? Well, next year is bringing two big hitters of note in the form of Disney's Lilo and Stitch and, give me a second, a Minecraft movie. The Stitch design is actually looking pretty good to me. I think the eyes could maybe be a little bit bigger if I'm really poking holes, and for some reason, maybe it's just me, but the promotional pictures make him look quite buff. I'll certainly be interested to see the designs of other characters from that first movie, like Pleaky and Captain Gantu, and whether or not they've stayed close to the original designs as they have with Stitch himself. But I'm quietly hopeful, even if live-action Disney hasn't done a lot to earn my trust as of late. And then, of course, there's the Minecraft movie. What can I say that hasn't already been said? This just looks awful. That's the point on the animation. That's not the point on the live action. At least one extra clip makes it look a little bit more passable. I still doubt the story's gonna be that grand. Let's throw Jason Momoa and Jack Black in front of a green screen for 10 days and see if we can cut a movie out of it. All the jokes, at least from that first trailer, just seem to be like, look at the weird animal. Isn't that weird? So random. You know, it's not for me. But hey, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. Or ironically elated by how terrible it turns out. Even still, at least for now, that's all the time I've got for live action counterparts to animated movies. It's certainly gone through phases and waves over the years. And as the technology has only gotten better and we've gotten closer and closer to photorealism, nowadays, actual animation has come away from photorealism, stylizing more towards Mitchell's vs. Machines, Spider-Verse, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles again. So I guess in that regard, I'll be very curious to see how that affects live action adaptations of other forms. Will they themselves try and stylize in their own ways and will loop full circle back to the stylings of Roger Rabbit and Looney Tunes, or are we sticking further and further on the Mufasa furry route? I guess we'll just have to see how it turns out. But either way, that's my ranking system, somewhat that I forgot I was doing halfway through, of animation to live action. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, and I shall see you in a little bit.